Welcome to another installment of Donning the Armor. This morning we'll begin in Genesis chapter 50, verse 1. Then Joseph fell on his father's face and wept over him and kissed him. And Joseph commanded his servants and physicians to embalm his father. So the physicians embalmed Israel. 40 days were required for him, for such are the days required for those who are embalmed. And the Egyptians mourned for him 70 days. So, with Jacob now passing, Joseph asks the physicians and servants at his command to embalm his father for, his burial. And in this case, the Israelites would eventually have their own method of embalming. Maybe they already did. This, I would assume, is probably the Egyptian style of embalming, because that's what they would know. And that way his body would be preserved as they take the journey back to Canaan. But so respected was Joseph, and now his father through him for the 17 years he was there, that the Egyptians mourned for Jacob for 70 days. Now when the days of his mourning were past, Joseph spoke to the household of Pharaoh, saying, If now I have found favor in your eyes, please speak in the hearing of Pharaoh, saying, My father made me swear, saying, Behold, I am dying. In my grave which I dug for myself in the land of Canaan, there you shall bury me. Now, therefore, please let me go up and bury my father, and I will come back. So remember, Joseph, authority over all things in Egypt, with the exception of Pharaoh. So if he wants to take a leave, he still needs Pharaoh's permission, and it's a sign of respect anyhow. But he's saying to Pharaoh's household, please ask and see that I can go to the land of Canaan to bury my father, but that I will be back. We're not going back to Canaan now. We are going to stay here in the land of Egypt. I will be back after the deed is done. And Pharaoh said, Go up and bury your father, as he made you swear. Such is the love for Pharaoh that he grants Joseph's request. So Joseph went up to bury his father, and with him went up all servants of Pharaoh, the elders of his house, and all the elders of the land of Egypt, as well as all the house of Joseph, his brothers, his father's house. Only their little ones, their flocks and their herds, they left in the land of Goshen, and there went up with him both chariots and horsemen, and it was a very great gathering. So it's not just Joseph. It's not just his brothers. It's his brothers, his father's servants, and now elders of Egypt and elders of the house of Pharaoh going up to pay respects to the father of Joseph, to Jacob, and to see him buried. Then they came to the threshing floor of Adad, which is beyond the Jordan, and they mourned there with a great and very solemn lamentation. He observed 7 days of mourning for his father, which is the Jewish custom. It's still the Jewish custom for observant Jews, is to sit Shiva for 7 days, to sit in mourning for 7 days over your lost loved one. And when the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites, saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Adad, they said, This is a deep mourning of the Egyptians. Therefore its name was called Abel Mizraim, which is beyond the Jordan. So his sons did for him just as he had commanded them. For his sons carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, before Mamre, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite as property for a burial place. And after he had buried his father, Joseph returned to Egypt, he and his brothers and all who went with him to bury his father. So they carried out as he commanded. They buried him in the place of Abraham. Now they return to Egypt. They return all together, having carried out the deed that they were sworn to do. But now we get back, and there's a little bit of a difference now. Now there starts to be some worry. When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, Perhaps Joseph will hate us and may actually repay us for all the evil which we did to them. So now they're saying, all right, we know we had all of this last 17 years. We have had all this peace between us. But what if Joseph was only doing that for Jacob's sake? What if now that our father's dead, he's going to repay us for the evil we did to him. Maybe he's just been waiting for the right time to carry out the vengeance. Maybe he hasn't forgiven us quite as much as we thought he did. So they sent messengers to Joseph, saying, "Before your father died, he commanded, saying, 'Thus you shall say to Joseph, I beg you, please forgive the trespass of your brothers and their sin, for they did evil to you. Now please forgive the trespass of the servants of the God of your father.' And Joseph wept when they spoke to him." So they sent messengers. They didn't even go to him. They sent messengers to him and said, "Please, we're sorry for everything we did. Now that Jacob's dead, please forgive all the trespasses we've done." And Joseph's brokenhearted over it. Then his brothers also went and fell down before his face, and they said, "Behold, we are your servants." Once again, replaying the dream, the first dream he had with the wheat sheaves. But in a way, it seems as though Joseph believed they were past this already. But now you can also see why Jacob had some of the words he had for him last chapter when he was giving it out. Is certain brothers turned completely around from the wickedness they had once held. Some of them seemed to not, and they still worried and held on to some of the worries that they had had in the past and some of the people that they had been in the past. Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day to save many people alive. Now, therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Said, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? Is vengeance mine to give? Is your fate and your judgment in my hands? I'm not God. That's for God to decide. But as for you, everything you meant for evil against me, God meant it for good. You sold me, and God used that for something even greater than we could have ever imagined, to save all of these people in Canaan, Egypt, and you. So don't be afraid. You're going to continue to be provided for through my authority." So Joseph dwelt in Egypt, he and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation, and the children of Machir, the son of Manasseh, were also brought up on Joseph's knees. So here you see, Joseph lived to 110. He lived a long life. He got to see children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. God blesses him in abundance in ways some of us could only dream. And Joseph said to his brethren, "I am dying, but God will surely visit you. He will bring you out of this land, to the land of which he swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob." So he's saying, "I'm dying." And I understand that might leave some of you in a little worried, because we're still in Egypt when we had that promised land. But don't worry, because God will surely come back to take you out of here. Then Joseph took an oath from the children of Israel, saying, "God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones from here." So Joseph died being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. So he made them take an oath, as he made with his own father. "God will surely visit you. We don't know when, but when he does, and when he carries us up out of here, you will take my bones out of here and bury me with my fathers. I will not be buried forever in Egypt, just until the day that God brings us out." And with that ends the book of Genesis. There, with the death of Joseph, the death of Jacob, and with the covenant and the reassurance that God will bring them out of Egypt one day, that is where Genesis ends. So now, let's move over to Exodus chapter 1, verse 1. "Now these are the names of the children of Israel who came to Egypt. Each man and his household came with Jacob. Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, and Benjamin, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. All those were descendants of Jacob. All those who were descendants of Jacob were 70 persons, for Joseph was in Egypt already. And Joseph died, and all his brothers, and all that generation. But the children of Israel were fruitful and increased abundantly, multiplied and grew exceedingly mighty, and the land was filled with them. So now, as we start verse 8, we're going to see the difference between the Pharaoh of chapter 50 of Genesis and now this new generation. As all those generations were gone, we now see a new Pharaoh arise in verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, who did no knowledge of him. It's been so long now that there's now a new king, and there might have been multiple pharaohs since that time. But now we come up to one who does not know Joseph at all, does not remember what he did and why the Hebrews are there. And he said to his people, "Look, the people of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." So now he's saying, look, this nation of people that we have living in here, these people are not Egyptians who keep separate from us over in Goshen. There's a lot of them, and they're mightier than we. If you put them together, there's more of them, which makes them a bigger threat than we are. So let us deal shrewdly with them, because what happens if a war breaks out? And they decide they're not Egyptian. They don't have to take our side. And then they go up out of the land and leave us decimated. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens. And they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. And they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with hard bondage, in mortar, in brick, and in all manner of servants in the field. All their service in which they made them serve was with rigor. So they made everything difficult. Now they're starting to make them slaves, which, if you remember, a few chapters ago we talked about it. During the famine, everyone in Egypt sold their lands and their personage to Pharaoh, which made them all essentially servants to be given freedom at the discretion of whatever ruler was over them. And for quite a long time, they've been dealing with a ruler and rulers who was willing to deal with them justly. Now you have a Pharaoh who no longer cares to deal with them justly and wants to deal with them oppressively. But it is interesting to see that the more that they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew. Because this has actually been the truth for the Christian church. And speaks to why in countries like America, in these Western prosperous countries, that the church body has stagnated a lot and follow versions of Christianity that are nominally Christian at best. And people seem to have no biblical knowledge, even those who call themselves Christians. And that's not even meant as a shot or a condemnation of these people who are reaching out for Christ. But it is just the truth that throughout the early church, when they were the most oppressed, was when they were at their strongest. And they grew and multiplied their most. Because when we are under bondage, when we are under oppression, is when we look to God the most. There's a reason why Jesus said that it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of heaven. It's not because the eye of the needle was some gate in Jerusalem. That's not a thing. He meant a literal camel through a literal eye of a literal needle. And the reason for that is because when you are living in abundant blessings and living the high life, you tend not to look to God. You tend to look to yourself, which makes it harder for you to humble yourself before the Lord and under his authority, which we need to do to become servants of Christ and followers of his. Christ is our Lord, our King, our God. We need to humble ourselves to him and his authority and his promises by trusting in them. Can't do that, or not that you can't, but it's less likely for you to do that when you are the one other people seem to want to humble themselves under. So in this way, the Egyptians are trying to oppress the Israelites, but that's causing them to call out to God more, which is causing them to increase and multiply and be blessed in their lives more, if not in their wealth. Then the king of Egypt spoke to the Hebrew midwives, of whom the name was Shiphrah and the other was Puah. And he said, when you do the duties of a midwife for the Hebrew women, and see them on the birth stools, if it is a son, then you shall kill him. If it is a daughter, then she shall live. But the midwives feared God. It did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but saved the male children alive. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this thing and saved the male children alive? So he's saying, why have you disobeyed me? I told you to kill the male children. And the midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are lively and give birth before the midwives come to them. We have the names recorded of 2 midwives. They're kings, they're emperors. We don't know the name of this Pharaoh because God didn't care enough to record his name, but he recorded the name of 2 midwives. And why? Because they disobeyed authority? Is that why? Because they lied? I mean, those are things we're told we're supposed to do. We're supposed to be well under authority. We're supposed to be well under godly authority, though. Just like Rahab, they lied, but they lied to honor, to love their neighbor as their self. 2 greatest commandments, Jesus said, because those 2 commandments, he said, are the culmination of the 10 commandments. To love your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, those encompass the first 4 commandments, and to love your neighbor as yourself encompasses the last 6. They are following through with that second commandment of Christ and loving their neighbor as themselves. They're not going to kill their neighbor because of the command of a corrupted authority above them. And their excuse is great. I love it. The Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women. They're lively and give birth before the midwives get to them. You're saying, your Egyptian women, they spend hours in childbirth. We have time to get to them before the baby's born. So we can, we would have had the chance then because we would have been there to have the baby born in our hands. But these Hebrew women, man, they call for us, and by the time we get there, they've already popped the baby out and holding them. We can't just grab the baby from them then. Because then they'll know something's up. And people will stop us. It's an interesting excuse. Therefore God dwelt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied it and grew very mighty. And so it was, because the midwives feared God, that he provided households for them. So they had their own households, their own children, their own grandchildren, and they did well for themselves. Blessed by God because they placed him as their spiritual authority and their heavenly authority over their earthly authority, or the one in their earthly authority. So Pharaoh commanded all his people, saying, every son who is born you shall cast into the river, and every daughter you shall save alive. Basically, every Hebrew boy that's born, you are to kill. Every son who is born, you kill. And every daughter you can leave alive, because then our Egyptians can breed with the Hebrews, and then they'll be Egyptians, or at least half Egyptians, and we'll breed them out. We'll breed them out of existence in that way. So, moving on to chapter 2. And a man of the house of Levi went and took as a wife a daughter of Levi. So the woman conceived and bore a son, and when she saw that he was a beautiful child, she hid him 3 months. But when she could no longer hide him, she took an ark of bulrushes for him, daubed it in asphalt and pitch, put the child in, and laid it in the reeds by the river's bank. And his sister stood afar off to know what would be done to him. So this child has an older brother, but this was before the edict was put out by Pharaoh. So now there's an edict put out, and this couple now has another beautiful son. And she's able to hide him for 3 months. But now you can't hide him anymore. And in doing so, now she has a choice to make. Much like the choice Jacob had to make with either allowing the chance of Benjamin having some horror befall him on the trip to Egypt, or the surety of his death in Canaan by starvation. This mother here is led by the same horrific and poor choice. You don't really have many options. Certain death by Egyptian hands, or putting him in the river and praying he somehow survives. Then the daughter of Pharaoh came down to bathe at the river, and her maidens walked along the riverside. And when she saw the ark among the reeds, she sent her maid to get it. And when she opened it, she saw the child, and behold, the baby wept. So she had compassion on him, and said, "This is one of the Hebrews' children." Then his sister said to Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and call a nurse for you from the Hebrew women, that she may nurse the child for you?" So Pharaoh's daughter finds the baby, and Miriam, who's been following this child, and in a way it makes you wonder how she's been following him. Has she been following him along the river, in the water? Because if so, that's a very dangerous trek. I mean, there are animals that could eat a child, even if she's a little bit older. She could be 10 or 11. She could still have been a meal. She could not have survived this journey to see where Moses had gone. But even this child comes up with a great idea. "Hey, that is a Hebrew child. Do you want me to go call one of the Hebrew women to nurse for you? You know, we've been taking their babies. They're producing milk, but they don't have a child now because we've been killing them. Do you want me to go find one of them to nurse the child for you, because you're not producing milk because you didn't just have a child? And we could go give that to one of the Hebrew women to wean." And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Go." So the maiden went and called the child's mother. Then Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you your wages." So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, "Because I drew him out of the water." So Miriam says, "Hey, you want me to go get a nurse?" And the Pharaoh's daughter says, "You know what? Go do that." So Miriam goes and gets her own mother, Moses' mother, and Pharaoh's daughter says, "You know what? Take this child and nurse him. Nurse him for the next year or so, and when he's weaned, you can bring him back to me. But while you're doing this for me, I'll pay you to do it." So not only is she blessed by her faith in putting Moses in the river to take a chance at saving him, she's now being blessed in abundance through wages from Pharaoh's own household to raise her own child. Now, it'll only be raised for a time, but what a miraculous gift by God to give back to this woman, saying, "You offered up this child. I have a plan for this child, and you're going to get to wean your own child." Bravery by Miriam to seeing her brother through, by being her brother's keeper. You heard Cain say that about Abel. "Am I my brother's keeper?" Well, this is Miriam saying, I am my brother's keeper. I want to know what happens to my little brother. I will put myself in danger. Even speaking to Pharaoh's daughter like this puts herself in danger. Who are you to be over there by Pharaoh's daughter? That could have ended well for her. But her faith showed her through. And now God's plan continues astride with the boy Moses, who will grow to be a man, will know of his Hebrew heritage, and will change the course of Israel's history. 400 years of oppression, waiting for this one man to be born. This one man born to people who born in a time where he was to die. The enemy works to thwart God's plans. The enemy cannot thwart God's plans because the enemy has no power over God. The enemy, Satan, is our accuser. He is our enemy. He is our tempter. He is not God's. He is not the rival of God. He is not the rival of Christ. He's not even the rival of the archangel Michael, who basically grabs him by the scruff of his neck and throws him out of heaven. He is our enemy, and he tries to thwart God's plan through us at every step. He tried to thwart God's plan by causing Pharaoh, in my opinion, through the false gods of Pharaoh, to start to nudge Pharaoh to tempt him into seeing the worst light possible for these Hebrews living in his land that have only blessed his land. Now, we're not told that outright, but that I do believe that. I believe in every instance we're going to see in Exodus with Pharaoh and his magicians being able to do things and try to replicate poorly the plagues of God. I believe that is demonic intervention. The hardening of Pharaoh's heart, I'll get to that. That's something different. But once again, what is meant for evil by man, God means for good and can turn to good. And here we see him turning it for good, reuniting a son and mother, reuniting a family for a time, but bringing about the salvation, the earthly salvation of the man who is going to go then and deliver his people from bondage. All right, that's where we will end it for today. Hopefully today's scripture was fruitful for you. Be blessed, and I pray you'll join me again next time for another installment of Donning the Armor.